A billionaire booked a honeymoon with his mistress at a luxury resort. But when he saw who owned it, dear listeners, and a heartfelt welcome to another unforgettable chapter of our journey here at Alcot Stories Channel. I'm your storyteller, Mr. Alcot Brian, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you with us tonight. Whether you're listening from the comfort of your home, on the way to work, or winding down after a busy day, I promise you are in for something special. Tonight, we have a tale that's rich with passion, suspense, and the kind of love that transforms lives. A story of forgiveness, redemption, and the power of choosing truth over everything else. It's a story that will stir your heart and perhaps make you reflect on your own relationships and choices. Now, family of Alcot, I humbly ask you to settle in, get comfortable, and give yourself permission to feel with every word, because this is a journey you don't want to miss. I know life can be busy, and time is precious, but I invite you to watch this story unfold to the very end. Trust me, the payoff is worth it. You'll witness a journey of growth, healing, and the sweet triumph of love. A love that builds bridges where none seemed possible. To all our loyal listeners, thank you for sharing this space with me. Whether you've been with us since the very first story, or you're just joining the Alcot family today, you are exactly where you need to be. And as always, remember, stories have a way of connecting us all, teaching us things about ourselves, and inspiring us to live more authentically. So, without further ado, let's dive into tonight's story. And remember, no matter where life takes you, there's always room for one more chapter, one more lesson, and always, always room for love. Zion Carter leaned back in his sleek black leather chair, the faint clink of ice against crystal filling the silent, dimly lit room as he swirled a glass of bourbon in his hand, the golden liquid catching the light of the setting sun that painted the skyline outside his penthouse in molten amber. A small, knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth as he stared at the email confirmation glowing on his laptop screen. The reservation was final, secured under a discreet alias, and the details were exactly as he had envisioned. 7 days of uninterrupted paradise with Amani Wells, far from the cold expectations of business, the scrutiny of society, and the suffocating pretense of the life he had built atop a mountain of steel, glass, and ruthless ambition. Amani deserved more than secret meetings and whispered promises, he thought as he rose from the chair, the weight of the decision he had made sinking deeper into his chest. She deserved a world where he wasn't just her stolen moment, but her beginning, her forever. The private island resort he had chosen was legendary for its luxury and anonymity, the kind of place where billionaires lost themselves and no questions were ever asked, a place where even a man like Zion Carter could pretend, just for a little while, that he was free to love without consequences. As he pressed the send button on a message to Amani, inviting her to pack only for paradise, a flicker of something dangerous and unfamiliar stirred inside him. Hope. 2 nights later, under the soft wash of moonlight and the roar of an idling private jet, Zion watched as Amani approached the plane, her silhouette graceful, her presence commanding even in the simplest of sundresses, her natural beauty needing no ornamentation, and when she smiled at him, that wide, heart-stopping smile that made the whole world feel slower, quieter, better. He felt the certainty tighten around his heart, like a vow. This woman could bring him to his knees if he let her, and maybe, just maybe, he wanted her to. The flight was a haze of laughter, soft kisses stolen behind the privacy curtain, promises murmured against skin, a preview of the tempest that was to come. By the time they touched down on the resort's private airstrip, the heavy air smelled of salt, orchids, and possibilities, and Zion's pulse thudded with anticipation as a sleek black car ferried them toward the main villa, its road flanked by lush tropical gardens and glittering glimpses of the turquoise sea beyond. Amani clutched his hand, her eyes wide with wonder, her spirit unguarded in a way Zion had never seen before, and it made him ache with a protective fierceness he hadn't known he was capable of. He wanted to give her everything. Not just this moment, but a future that looked like this. Free and wild and golden. As they reached the villa, the staff greeted them with cool towels, champagne flutes, and a reverence that spoke of immense wealth and absolute discretion, and Zion drank it all in. The marble floors, the panoramic windows, the infinity pool that melted into the horizon. But none of it compared to the way Amani's skin glowed under the Caribbean sun, how her laughter tumbled out, rich and musical, as she explored every luxurious corner of their new home. Later that evening, as the sky bruised into violet and the ocean murmured against the shore, Zion led her onto the balcony, his arms wrapping around her from behind as they stood beneath a sky littered with stars, the warm wind teasing the hem of her dress, the scent of hibiscus heavy in the air. And in that perfect silence he whispered promises he wasn't yet sure how to keep. Promises of forever, of building something real, of no longer hiding in the shadows. Amani turned in his arms, her eyes searching his, and for once Zion didn't flinch from the weight of her gaze, didn't cloak himself in the armor of half-truths and calculated smiles. He let her see him, the man beneath the empire, the man who wanted to be worthy of her trust, her heart, her everything. The kiss they shared then was different from all the ones before, slower, deeper, threaded with an emotion so raw and terrifying, Zion almost pulled away, almost. But Amani's fingers wove into his hair, anchoring him to the moment, and he surrendered, letting the walls fall as she led him back inside, where the night unfolded between them in a symphony of whispered confessions, reverent touches, and love-making that felt less like possession and more like discovery. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the villa in soft gold, Zion lay awake beside her, tracing lazy patterns over her bare shoulder, feeling, for the first time in longer than he could remember, the weight of happiness pressed heavy against his ribs, not because of what he owned or what he had conquered, but because of what he might finally be brave enough to claim. Tomorrow, he thought, would be the beginning of everything, a new chapter written in sunlight and salt air, laughter and moans, trust and dreams. And as sleep finally claimed him, Zion Carter believed, with a certainty that frightened and thrilled him in equal measure, that nothing could shatter the perfect world he was building with Amani on this island, made for love and second chances. The soft rustle of linen sheets against sun-warmed skin stirred Zion awake before the sun had fully claimed the sky. The faint sound of waves brushing the shore, an irresistible call just beyond the glass doors of their villa. And for a brief moment, nestled beside Amani's sleeping form, he allowed himself to believe this was what life could be. Effortless, joyful, filled with the simple luxury of waking up next to the only thing he truly desired. Reluctantly, he slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb her, shrugging into linen pants and stepping onto the balcony where the early morning painted the ocean in shades of silver and blue, and somewhere inside him, a restless energy coiled tight, a sense that something unseen was hovering just out of reach. After a slow breakfast, served by a smiling attendant who bowed out swiftly, leaving them alone with their mimosas and tropical fruits, Zion and Amani dressed for the official welcome ceremony the resort insisted upon. A casual affair, they were told, just to orient the new arrivals. But as Zion knotted his watch strap around his wrist, an inexplicable unease gnawed at his instincts honed over years of navigating hostile boardrooms and treacherous partnerships. Amani, radiant in a flowing white sundress, tugged him playfully toward the open-air pavilion where musicians strummed soft island melodies and other guests lounged with drinks in hand, the air thick with the scent of sea salt, coconut, and something sweeter, more elusive. Promise, perhaps, or deception. For a while, Zion allowed himself to be charmed by it all, his hand firm at the small of Amani's back as they were handed champagne flutes by graceful servers and welcomed with bright, polished smiles, their arrival nothing unusual among the glittering elite who vacationed here. But as the general manager, a sleek, polished man with a French accent, took the small stage to introduce the visionary owner of our beloved Eden Isle resort, Zion's gaze sharpened, his body stiffening instinctively as an electric charge raced through him, warning him, bracing him. Applause rippled lazily through the gathering, but Zion didn't hear it, didn't even register the beginning of the speech, because striding onto the stage in a deep emerald dress that clung lovingly to every curve, her head held high, and her smile a weapon honed to diamond brilliance, was Naomi Sinclair, the woman he thought he would never see again, the woman whose absence had once carved a hollow so deep inside him that he'd spent years pretending it never existed. For a suspended, agonizing moment, the world seemed to narrow, the colors fading until only she remained, luminous and terrible, her dark skin gleaming like polished mahogany under the Caribbean sun, her eyes scanning the crowd with effortless command. And when her gaze flickered over Zion, pausing, lingering, recognizing, something inside him fractured with a silent, thunderous crack. Beside him, Amani clapped politely, blissfully unaware of the hurricane that had just erupted inside Zion's chest, and he struggled to master his expression, to steady his breathing as Naomi continued speaking in a voice that was richer, more polished, yet no less devastating than he remembered, welcoming them all to Eden Isle, promising magic, discretion, indulgence, and memories that would last a lifetime. Zion barely heard the rest, his mind spinning as fragments of the past slammed into him. Whispered dreams beneath cheap cotton sheets, promises made under stars, the bitter taste of ambition overpowering the sweetness of love, and the cold, hollow victory that followed when he had walked away from Naomi Sinclair in pursuit of a future that now seemed sterile and meaningless. She had vanished after that, disappeared so completely from his world that he had believed she had been a dream, a ghost of a boy he barely remembered. And yet, here she was, real and formidable, no longer the wide-eyed girl he had once held, but a queen ruling over paradise itself, and the irony of standing on her turf, uninvited, unprepared, cut deeper than any blade. As the applause swelled again, and Naomi's smile widened just a fraction, a smile that might have been amusement, might have been triumph, might have been something far darker. Zion felt a bead of sweat trace the line of his spine, not from the heat, but from the sudden, terrifying knowledge that whatever plans he had made for this week were already unraveling, slipping through his fingers like sand. As Naomi stepped down from the stage and began to move gracefully among the guests, exchanging warm handshakes and personal greetings, Zion fought the urge to bolt, to grab Amani and flee back to the safety of the jet, to abandon this dream before it twisted into a nightmare. But pride and curiosity, those twin devils, rooted him in place. Amani leaned in, whispering how amazing everything was, how she couldn't believe he had found such a perfect, hidden gem, and Zion managed a smile, hollow and brittle, as he tightened his arm around her, shielding himself from the inevitable collision barreling toward them. He didn't know what Naomi wanted, or if she had even recognized him truly. But deep down, in the place where instinct spoke louder than reason, Zion knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. He hadn't just stumbled into paradise. He had walked willingly into the lair of a woman he had wronged, a woman who now held all the cards, and whatever game she was about to play, he was already losing before the first move had even been made. The air around Zion seemed to press heavier, thicker, as he stood motionless in the crowd, his eyes never straying far from Naomi, the woman who had once been his everything, the woman he had broken without a second thought in his endless chase for success. Time bent and twisted, pulling him backward, and for the first time since he had walked away from her years ago, the memories rushed back with the force of a tidal wave, flooding every corner of his mind and his heart. It had been a different life then, a life where love had felt like a luxury he could afford, a time when he was young enough to believe that the world would bend to his will, and that Naomi, with her fiery intellect, sharp wit, and unshakable belief in him, would always be there, by his side. Their first meeting had been on a crisp autumn evening in Chicago, in a small cafe tucked between tall buildings, both of them strangers to the city, both of them lost in their own worlds, until their paths had collided with such force that it was as if the universe itself had shifted. He had been drawn to her immediately, to her presence, her warmth, the way she seemed to light up everything around her without even trying. Naomi had been a contrast to everything he knew, grounded, wise beyond her years, with a quiet confidence that made him want to be better, not for the world's recognition, but for her. And for a time, that had been enough. Their love had been a quiet, beautiful thing, built on shared dreams, secret laughter, and whispered promises under the cover of night. Zion had known that he had found something rare, something precious, and he had cherished it until the day the ambition that had been the driving force of his life took over. He could still remember the day his opportunity had arrived, a chance to take his company to new heights, to secure his place among the most powerful names in business. And suddenly, the love he had once believed would anchor him felt like an anchor pulling him down, keeping him tethered to something he could no longer afford. Naomi had tried to reason with him, to remind him that there was more to life than wealth, than status. But Zion had been too blinded by his need for more, for power, for the validation of those who had once doubted him. She had begged him to stay, to choose her, but the fear of being tethered to a life he might one day resent had made him cruel. He had walked away, leaving Naomi standing in the middle of their life together, heartbroken, confused, but strong. She had disappeared after that, slipping from his world as silently as she had entered it, and Zion had buried the pain of that loss beneath the mountain of accolades and success he built in her absence, convincing himself that he had made the right choice. But even as he stood there now, in the heat of the Caribbean sun, watching Naomi greet guests with the same regal grace, Zion knew the truth that he had buried so deep within himself. He had never stopped loving her. And now, seeing her again after all these years, he couldn't help but wonder how much of his soul she still possessed, how much of her had stayed with him, locked away in the dark corners of his mind, in the quiet moments when he had convinced himself that everything he had built was worth the price. Zion's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Amani's voice, soft and curious, asking if he was okay. But he couldn't bring himself to answer her immediately. He couldn't take his eyes off Naomi, who, despite the passage of time, looked even more stunning than he remembered. If anything, the years had only sharpened her beauty, her elegance, her strength. She was no longer the young woman he had abandoned, full of idealistic love and dreams for a shared future. Naomi was a queen now, a woman who had reclaimed herself and built something that Zion couldn't even begin to comprehend. But despite the success and power that had been woven into the fabric of her life, Zion knew one thing for sure. Naomi was no less devastating than she had been in their youth. A flicker of guilt twisted in his gut as he turned away from her, catching Amani's gaze, and for the first time in their relationship, Zion realized the weight of the secret he was carrying, the truth about Naomi, about his past, the part of him that he had never allowed anyone to see. It wasn't just the shame of his betrayal that weighed on him now, but the knowledge that he had failed both Naomi and Amani in different ways, and as much as he wanted to bury the past and escape the consequences of his choices, it was impossible to ignore the ghost of Naomi's presence. For the first time in years, Zion felt himself torn between the future he had carefully constructed and the past that he couldn't seem to outrun. Naomi had returned, not as a victim of his ambition, but as a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had turned his heart's most painful wound into a weapon. And Zion knew, with a deep, deep, unsettling certainty, that the reunion they were now facing wasn't just a confrontation of old wounds, but the beginning of a new game, one that neither of them could afford to lose. The stakes had just been raised, and Zion had no idea how it would all play out. But deep down, he felt the haunting reminder of Naomi's influence over him, the invisible string still tying them together, pulling him toward a fate he couldn't avoid. The weight of Naomi's unexpected reappearance lingered in the air like a thick fog, settling over Zion and Amani as they stood near the resort's entrance, the sunlight flickering off the water and casting dappled shadows on the ground. Zion couldn't shake the feeling that Naomi was watching him, studying him from afar, even as he turned his attention back to Amani, her radiant smile seeming like a fragile shield against the tension that threatened to snap between them. Amani's eyes sparkled as she chatted animatedly about the resort's offerings, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Zion, however, felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath him, his pulse quickening with every passing moment. Naomi was not just back. She was in control. and she was making her move. As Zion's mind raced, trying to process the flood of emotions and memories she had stirred, the gentle but deliberate approach of a resort staff member interrupted his thoughts. The young man, impeccably dressed and with a wide smile, greeted them warmly, his demeanor polished to perfection. "Mr. Carter, Miss Wells," he said, bowing slightly as he extended a silver envelope toward them. Zion's instincts flared, but he took it without hesitation, tearing it open to find a handwritten note from Naomi herself. The elegant script was unmistakable. Naomi's personal touch, the way her words seemed to curl with both charm and authority. "I hope you are enjoying your stay," the note began, its tone deceptively sweet. "I wanted to personally offer you an exclusive upgrade to one of our most luxurious villas, a space that promises unparalleled privacy, comfort, and indulgence. Please allow my team to escort you." Zation's heart skipped a beat, the words a perfect blend of grace and subtle manipulation. The villa, with its private beach, panoramic ocean views, and indulgent amenities, was the resort's crown jewel, the one place that no guests could access without Naomi's explicit approval. Amani's eyes widened in delight at the offer, but Zion, his mind still reeling, felt a pang of suspicion. Why this sudden gesture of generosity? Was Naomi really just being kind, or was there something more insidious at play? He glanced at Amani, who was already gathering her things with excitement, and he hesitated. There was something too polished about this offer, too perfect, too timely. Naomi was not a woman who gave gifts without a price. He could feel the invisible thread pulling him closer to her once again, and this time the pull was stronger than before. As the staff led them through the resort's labyrinthine paths, each step felt heavier, the air growing thicker with the weight of Zion's unease. They were escorted past villas that oozed luxury, their modern facades a sharp contrast to the lush greenery surrounding them. Every turn, every glance seemed orchestrated, a masterfully constructed stage meant to draw them deeper into Naomi's web. When they finally reached the villa, it took Zion a moment to compose himself as the doors were swung open to reveal the breathtaking interior. Plush furniture, marble floors that gleamed like glass, walls lined with tropical artwork, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering an unobstructed view of the endless ocean. But it was the quiet in the villa that unsettled him, the stillness that felt too deliberate, too staged. The staff handed them a key and left them alone, the soft sound of their footsteps fading as the door clicked shut behind them. Zion felt the pulse of tension vibrate in the silence, and his mind raced to piece together Naomi's intentions. She had known he would accept. She had known that, with Amani in tow, the allure of the villa would be irresistible. The setting was perfect, but something felt wrong. Amani was already exploring the villa, marveling at the opulence and beauty, but Zion's thoughts were fixed on Naomi. Why had she done this? What was her endgame? The memories of their past, the betrayal, the broken promises, the pain, all twisted in his gut. But Zion knew that this time there was no escaping Naomi's influence. She had given him a taste of paradise, but it was not a gift. No, this was a trap, one that had been set with meticulous care, and Zion had unwittingly walked right into it. Amani's voice cut through his thoughts as she flitted from one room to another, her excitement bubbling over. "Zion, you have to see this. It's even more amazing than I imagined." She was too happy, too innocent in her excitement. She didn't see the darkness lying beneath the surface of this perfect illusion. Zion forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice tight. He moved to join her, but his mind remained elsewhere, focused on Naomi and her hidden agenda. The villa was an obvious symbol of power, a reminder that Naomi wasn't just a woman from his past, but a force to be reckoned with, and she was pulling all the strings. Zion knew that he had to be careful. Naomi was playing a long game, one that involved not just him, but Amani as well. And this villa, this perfect paradise, was her first move. He could feel it in his bones. The game was on, and he was already deep inside it. Naomi had given them this gift, this temptation, but the price was something far steeper than they could ever imagine. As Amani continued to explore, unaware of the danger swirling just beneath the surface, Zion stood by the window, his reflection mirrored in the glass, his gaze lost in the horizon. For the first time since arriving at Eden Isle, Zion couldn't shake the feeling that this was no longer just a vacation. This was a battle for his soul, his future, and his heart, and Naomi was the one holding all the cards as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the villa's expansive grounds. A quiet tension settled between Zion and Amani, a subtle shift in the air that neither of them could ignore. Amani, who had been so carefree and filled with wonder when they first arrived, now found herself hesitating, her thoughts more often than not drifting back to the way Zion had acted earlier that day. She had noticed it, of course, that fleeting moment when his gaze had lingered a little too long on Naomi. That instant when the light in his eyes had shifted from admiration to something darker, something she couldn't name, but felt in her bones. She had tried to brush it off, convinced that it was just her overactive imagination, but the nagging feeling refused to leave her, gnawing at the edges of her mind. As she wandered through the villa, admiring the luxuries that Naomi's gift had provided them, a sinking sensation spread in her chest, tightening around her heart. Amani knew Zion better than most, had shared enough late-night conversations and tender moments to recognize the small changes in him, the shifts in his demeanor. And something was definitely different now. She had thought this vacation would be the culmination of their budding relationship, a chance to escape the noise of their everyday lives and truly connect, to discover something deeper and more meaningful between them. But now she couldn't shake the feeling that Zion was slipping further away from her with each passing hour, as though a part of him was still tethered to something, or someone else. Naomi. Amani had seen the way Zion had reacted when he first saw her, the way his posture had stiffened, his eyes narrowing as if seeing a ghost from his past, the way Naomi had greeted him with that confident, almost calculating smile, a smile that had made Amani's stomach twist with unease. There was something between them, something unresolved, something Amani couldn't quite put her finger on. And as much as she tried to convince herself that she was just being paranoid, the weight of her insecurities grew heavier by the minute. She found herself standing by the edge of the villa's infinity pool, the setting sun painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, a beautiful scene that only highlighted the growing distance she felt between her and Zion. A gentle breeze stirred her hair, but it did little to cool the unease swirling inside her. She had always prided herself on being confident, independent, never allowing doubt to cloud her vision. But now, as she looked out over the endless horizon, She couldn't help but wonder if she was simply a fleeting distraction for Zion, a beautiful, temporary thrill to keep him occupied until something, or someone, more important came along. Naomi. She had seen the way Zion's expression softened when Naomi's name had been mentioned, how his lips had tightened when he'd seen her step onto the stage earlier. Amani tried to brush off the feeling, tried to tell herself that this was just the kind of tension that came with old flames, that Zion would never let someone from his past interfere with their future. But as the hours passed, and Zion seemed increasingly distracted, distant, she began to question everything. She knew that Zion had a past, one that he had never fully opened up to her about, but she hadn't realized just how much of it still lingered, how much of it still had a hold on him. The way Naomi had commanded the room, the way she had moved with effortless grace, almost like she was born to be in charge. Amani had felt it then, a strange sense of competition that she hadn't expected. But more than that, she had felt a deep, growing sense of doubt. Was she enough for Zion? Or was she just a beautiful face, an accessory in a life that didn't truly need her? The thought stung more than she was willing to admit, and as the last light of day disappeared behind the ocean's horizon, she felt a chill creep up her spine, not from the cooling air, but from the uncertainty gnawing at her heart. Zion had been so different with her, so attentive, so tender. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was slipping away, pulled back into the orbit of a woman he had once loved, a woman whose presence seemed to demand everything from him, even now. She tried to push the thoughts from her mind, but the doubt persisted, growing roots deep in her chest. Amani's eyes flickered to Zion, standing a few feet away, lost in thought as he gazed out at the ocean. She could see the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were rigid, as if he were carrying a weight she couldn't see, but felt all too clearly. He turned to her, offering a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes, and Amani felt a pang in her chest. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Zion's smile faltered for just a moment, and then he nodded, his usual charm sliding back into place, though Amani could tell it was forced. "Yeah, just thinking." The words were casual, but Amani could see through them, could feel the underlying tension that he wasn't sharing with her. And that was it, wasn't it? The realization hit her like a thunderclap. Zion had been closed off, keeping things from her, and now that Naomi had reappeared, it felt like she was no longer a priority. She was no longer the woman who had captured his heart. Amani turned away, trying to compose herself before he could notice the crack in her facade. "I think I'll get some rest," she said, her voice shaky despite her best efforts. "We've had a long day." Zion nodded, but Amani saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something more, but the words never came. Instead, they stood there in silence, the distance between them growing wider until Amani turned and walked back into the villa, leaving Zion behind, standing alone at the edge of the world, the ocean stretching out before him like an endless expanse of nothingness. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as Zion sat alone on the balcony of the villa, his thoughts swirling like a storm that he couldn't control. The breeze was cool, but the heat inside him was unbearable. Amani's doubts were still fresh in his mind, and her words echoed in the corners of his consciousness. It wasn't just her uncertainty that gnawed at him. It was the growing realization that he was losing control of everything, his life, his heart, and now, it seemed, his own desires. The sound of soft footsteps on the marble floors broke his reverie, and before he could turn, he knew who it was. Naomi. She had a way of entering a room unnoticed, like a shadow, always present, always watching. He didn't need to see her to feel the air shift. It was as if she brought her own kind of gravity, pulling everything and everyone toward her. Zion. Her voice was like silk, smooth and low, and it sent a shiver down his spine. He didn't look at her immediately, unwilling to face the emotions she stirred, the past she resurrected with every word. But then, she was there, standing just at the edge of the balcony, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the moon, her eyes dark with something unreadable. The years had been kind to Naomi, but it was more than that. It was the power she exuded, the confidence, the control. "Do you ever stop thinking about me?" she asked, her voice laced with a teasing, almost dangerous undertone. Zion's heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I'm not sure that's your concern," he replied, his tone as controlled as he could muster, though the words felt hollow the moment they left his mouth. Naomi stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the stone, and Zion could feel her presence like a weight on his chest. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his arm, the touch light but electric, sending a jolt through his body. He stiffened, fighting the rush of desire that surged through him, trying to bury it beneath layers of guilt and unresolved tension. Naomi noticed, of course, the way his muscles tightened, the way his breath caught. She had always known how to read him, knew the subtle changes in his demeanor, the ones no one else could spot. And she was always so patient, so deliberate, giving him just enough space to think he had the upper hand. "You look so much like the man I used to know," she continued, her voice soft, almost nostalgic. "The one who would have done anything to be with me." There it was. The bait, the memory that always hooked him. Zion's chest tightened as the ghosts of their past came rushing back. The late nights spent together, the promises they had whispered in the dark, the love they had shared before it all came crashing down. Naomi leaned in, her breath warm against his ear as she spoke. "You were so willing to give up everything for me once. What happened to that man?" Her words were a challenge, a taunt, and they slipped under his defenses like a blade in the dark. He closed his eyes, the memories of their time together flashing like vivid dreams, both beautiful and painful. But Naomi was not done. She was playing a game, and Zion knew it. She was testing him, drawing him back in with the scent of their past, with the subtle reminder of what they had shared, and the threat of what she could destroy if he didn't play along. "You don't have to answer that, Zion," she murmured, her lips brushing the side of his neck. He could feel her breath on his skin, hot and inviting, and it took every ounce of his self-control not to turn toward her, to give in to the pull that was already suffocating him. "But just remember, I know things about you, things no one else does, things that could destroy everything you've worked for." The warning was clear, but it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Naomi wasn't just playing with his emotions, she was playing with his life. And she knew that if she pushed hard enough, he would crack. Zion's mind spun as the weight of her words sank in. She was dangerous, not just because of what she knew, but because of what she could make him feel. The attraction between them had always been undeniable, an electric current that ran through their veins whenever they were near each other. He had tried to suppress it, to bury it beneath the walls he had built around himself. But Naomi had a way of breaking through those walls, of making him feel things he thought he had left behind. He had come here to escape, to find peace with Amani, to carve out a future that didn't revolve around the ghosts of his past. But Naomi wasn't just a ghost. She was a storm, and she was pulling him back into her orbit. "You think I won't do it, Zion," Naomi whispered, her lips brushing his ear. "But I will. I've waited too long to watch you slip away from me. And if I have to remind you of what we had to get you back, I will." Zion felt the heat of her words seep into his skin, and he realized then that he wasn't sure if he could fight her anymore. The attraction was too strong, the tension too thick. He had no idea what she wanted from him, or what she planned to take. But he knew one thing for sure. Naomi was never just a woman from his past. She was a force, and the storm she was bringing would tear apart everything in its path, including the fragile future he had built with Amani. He turned to face her, had his heart racing. But before he could speak, Naomi placed a finger gently to his lips, silencing him. "Don't say a word, Zion," she murmured, her voice low and dangerous. "You know what's at stake. I'm offering you a chance to relive what we had, to take back what you lost. But only if you're willing to play the game." The choice was clear. Zion could either step into her web, risking everything he had built, or he could walk away. But Naomi knew that he was already too far gone. The game had begun, and Zion was already caught in it. The question now was whether he could get out alive, or if Naomi would win, just as she always had. The villa was bathed in the soft glow of the early morning light as Amani woke up, the silence around her unnervingly thick. Zion was still asleep, his breathing slow and deep beside her, but something felt off. Amani couldn't shake the feeling that there was a shadow lingering over her, that something was unraveling just beneath the surface of the perfect vacation they had promised to themselves. She had tried to push her doubts aside, to let herself believe in the magic of their connection. But the nagging uncertainty still clung to her. Her heart, once full of hope, now felt heavy with the weight of something she couldn't quite understand. She decided to get some fresh air, hoping it would clear her mind. Moving quietly, she slipped out of bed, leaving Zion undisturbed. She walked through the villa's expansive living area, her footsteps barely making a sound as she opened the door to the balcony. The view was breathtaking. The ocean stretched out endlessly, the waves crashing softly against the shore, a tranquil and peaceful sight. But as she stood there, letting the cool breeze brush her skin, she heard something that made her freeze in place. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. The low murmur of voices. Curiosity piqued, Amani stepped closer to the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she leaned in just enough to hear the conversation more clearly. The voices belonged to Zion and Naomi. She couldn't make out every word, but she could hear the tension in their exchange, the unspoken weight behind every sentence. Amani's heart skipped a beat when she heard Zion's voice, rough and laced with regret. "Naomi, you don't understand. I had no choice. I couldn't let everything I worked for slip away because of us." The words were like a punch to her chest. United States. What was Zion talking about? What did Naomi mean to him? She felt the world tilt beneath her as she edged closer, straining to hear more. Naomi's voice was calm, almost too calm, as if she was carefully choosing her words. You never had a choice, Zion. You chose power, success, everything except me. And now you're pretending this is some kind of love story, a honeymoon with your little mistress, when we both know what this really is. Amani's breath hitched, and she pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Zion and Naomi had a past, one that clearly ran deeper than she had ever imagined. But there was more, much more. Zion's voice grew quieter, but she could still hear the anguish in his words. I made a mistake, Naomi. A huge mistake. But I can't go back now. I can't undo what I did. Naomi's response was cold, venomous almost. No, you can't. You sold out everything. Everything for money, Zion. For ambition. And now you want to come back to me, to act like we can pick up where we left off. But you know what? You can't. You left me. You betrayed me. And nothing will ever change that. The sting of those words shot through Amani like a blade. Betrayed. Zion had betrayed Naomi. For money. Amani's hands trembled as the realization settled in her chest like a cold, heavy stone. All this time, she had thought they were building something real. Something solid. But now, she saw it clearly. Zion wasn't just hiding something from her. He was hiding someone. Something from his past. A betrayal so deep that it was shaping everything about him. Everything about their relationship. Her mind raced as she listened to the rest of the conversation, her body frozen in shock. Naomi's voice softened, but the bitterness in it was unmistakable. And now you're here with her, pretending like everything is fine, pretending like she's the one who makes you happy. But we both know why you're really here, Zion. You're hiding. Hiding from your real fiancé, the one you're supposed to marry, the one you've been lying to. You're running from your life. And this honeymoon isn't about love. It never was. The final words hit Amani like a slap, her whole body going numb with the weight of the truth. Zion wasn't just here with her on some romantic getaway. He was hiding from the woman he was meant to marry. The woman who had been waiting for him all this time, while Amani had been swept up in a lie. She could hardly breathe, her chest tightening with the rush of emotions that flooded her. She had been a fool, hadn't she? Everything she had believed in, the passion, the tenderness, the connection, it had all been built on a lie. Zion hadn't chosen her. He had chosen escape. He had chosen a temporary distraction. The truth was devastating, and Amani felt her heart breaking in 1,000 pieces. She wanted to confront him, to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was stand there, feeling the ground crumble beneath her. The man she had fallen for, the man who had promised her a future, had betrayed her in the most cruel and heartless way possible. The words Naomi had spoken echoed in her mind over and over again. You're just the mistress. That was all she was to Zion. Just another fleeting escape, another chapter in a story he was too afraid to face. The reality of their entire relationship was crashing down around her, and she realized that Zion hadn't been hiding from Naomi at all. He had been hiding from the truth. Hiding from the consequences of his actions, from the life he had built on lies. And she had been the one to get caught in the middle. As the realization set in, Amani felt a surge of anger and heartbreak, the emotions threatening to consume her. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. She had been nothing more than a pawn in a game Zion had been playing all along, and now the truth had finally come to light. The honeymoon had been a lie, a beautiful illusion that had shattered in an instant. And Amani, with all her love and trust, was left to pick up the pieces of a broken heart. The silence in the villa was deafening as Amani stood frozen, the crushing weight of the truth still settling over her like a suffocating fog. She had been betrayed, not just by Zion, but by the very foundation of everything she thought they were building. The honeymoon that had once seemed like the beginning of a love story was nothing more than a temporary escape, an illusion that had crumbled with the revelation of Zion's secret past. Yet as the shock began to wear off, something darker began to stir within Amani. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it ignited something inside her, something that made her feel both enraged and desperate for answers. She needed to confront Zion. She needed to know everything. But as she turned to leave the balcony and seek out the man who had shattered her trust, a voice stopped her in her tracks. "Going somewhere." Naomi's voice was low, smooth, almost too calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it that sent a shiver down Amani's spine. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what she would find. Naomi was standing just inside the doorway, watching her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Amani didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took in the sight of the woman who had manipulated Zion, who had played with him like a puppet. And now, it seemed, Naomi was here to finish the game. "You heard, didn't you?" Naomi asked, her tone matter-of-fact, as if she were simply stating a fact, not revealing a devastating truth. Amani didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand that Naomi explain everything, but she held her tongue, not knowing if she was ready to hear whatever came next. Naomi, however, didn't wait for an answer. She took a few steps toward Amani, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, her eyes locked onto Amani's with a cold intensity that sent a chill through the air. "It's funny," Naomi began, her voice dripping with dark amusement. "How easily Zion thought he could escape his past. How quickly he thought he could leave me behind." Her lips curled into a smirk, and for a brief moment Amani saw the viciousness lurking just beneath the surface. "But I'm not the type to be forgotten so easily. And Zion? He's never been the type to leave things unresolved. He made his choice, and now I'm going to make him pay for it." Amani's stomach twisted at Naomi's words, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. Naomi was reveling in her own power, enjoying the control she had over Zion's life, over the lives of everyone around her. "You see, Amani," Naomi continued, her voice softening with a dangerous calm, "I'm not here to rekindle old flames or make amends. No, that's not what this is about. This is about revenge, a repayment for the betrayal Zion inflicted on me all those years ago." Amani's breath hitched as the weight of Naomi's words began to sink in. Revenge? Naomi wasn't here to win Zion back. She was here to destroy him, to make him suffer for the pain he had caused her. Amani's mind raced as she tried to understand the depths of Naomi's plan, but Naomi didn't give her time to process. She moved closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "I've been patient, Amani," she said, her voice a whisper of silk and venom. "But patience has its limits. Zion betrayed me for money, for power, and I've spent years watching him build his empire, watching him climb higher and higher, thinking he could escape what he did to me. But he's wrong. No one ever truly escapes their past. And now, I'm going to make sure he understands that. Amani's pulse quickened as Naomi's words wrapped around her like a noose. You see, Naomi continued, her gaze never leaving Amani's. I've partnered with some of Zion's enemies, people he thought he had left behind, people he never expected would come after him. They're all aligned now, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment is coming, Amani. All I have to do is sit back and watch as Zion loses everything, just as I did. Amani felt the ground beneath her feet begin to shift. Naomi wasn't just playing a game of emotional manipulation. She was executing a meticulously crafted plan, one that would ruin Zion's empire piece by piece. She was going to destroy him, using every secret, every betrayal, every weakness Zion had ever shown, to tear down everything he had built. Zion's past, the betrayal, the lies. They were all coming back to haunt him, and Naomi was the one orchestrating it all. Amani's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to Naomi, the full scope of the woman's ruthlessness sinking in. Naomi wasn't just hurt by Zion's abandonment, she was consumed by it. And now she was willing to burn everything to the ground to make Zion feel the same pain she had felt. Amani had been nothing more than a pawn in Naomi's game, a distraction, a tool to get to Zion, to make him pay. Naomi wasn't interested in love. She was interested in revenge, and she would stop at nothing to get it. You understand now, don't you? Naomi asked, her voice low and almost predatory as she stepped closer to Amani. Zion's going to lose everything, his empire, his career, his wealth, and when he does, it will be because of his own choices. He's the one who betrayed me, and now he's the one who will pay. The finality in Naomi's words hit Amani like a punch to the gut. The stakes had never been higher. Zion's entire world was on the brink of destruction, and the woman who had once loved him, the woman he had betrayed, was the one pulling the strings. Amani's mind reeled, her heart torn between the man she had fallen for and the realization that Naomi's plan was much larger, much darker than she could have ever imagined. Zion was in danger. The empire he had worked so hard to build was on the edge of collapse, and Naomi's revenge had already begun. The air inside the villa felt suffocating, thick with the tension that hung between Amani and Zion. Amani's heart was still pounding from the confrontation with Naomi, her mind racing with everything she had just learned. Zion had lied to her, manipulated her into believing that their relationship was real, when all along he had been hiding from his past, from his guilt, his betrayal, and his real fiancé. But Naomi's words echoed in her head like a constant drumbeat. Zion will pay for what he did. Amani stood at the edge of the villa's balcony, looking out over the water, her mind torn between the man she had fallen for and the rage that bubbled up inside her. Zion had betrayed her trust in the most painful way possible, and Naomi's plan to destroy him had only made the wound deeper. What was she supposed to do? Was she meant to be the loyal mistress, standing by Zion's side? Or was she meant to let Naomi take him down, to watch him suffer the consequences of his actions? The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She had trusted Zion with everything, with her heart, with her dreams, and now she was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Zion was still inside the villa, likely unaware of the storm that was brewing within her. Amani's mind raced as she paced the room, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion, hurt, and betrayal. Her heart told her to leave, to walk away from Zion, and never look back. But the thought of seeing him suffer, seeing him lose everything, just as Naomi promised, stirred something darker inside her. Could she be the one to bring him down? Could she work with Naomi, play her part in destroying the man who had hurt her so deeply? She didn't know. But she knew one thing for sure. Zion had to answer for his lies, for the secrets he had kept, for the choices he had made. She couldn't just stand by and let him think everything would be okay. And yet, even as these thoughts consumed her, she couldn't shake the memory of their first days together, of the way he had held her, kissed her, promised her a future. Was it all a lie? Or was there something real in the mess of emotions and deception that now defined their relationship? She didn't know. And she was afraid to find out. The sound of the door opening behind her startled Amani, and she spun around, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Zion standing in the doorway, his face a mix of concern and guilt. He hadn't expected her to confront him. Not like this. Not with everything hanging in the balance. But there was no escaping the truth now. "Amani," he said softly, his voice filled with a raw vulnerability that she hadn't heard before. "We need to talk." His words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything that had led them here. Amani stared at him, her chest tightening, the anger and confusion bubbling inside her like a volcano. She didn't want to talk to him. She didn't want to hear his excuses or his apologies. She didn't want him to try and fix things with his smooth words and empty promises. But as she looked at him, something inside her wavered. She saw the pain in his eyes, the struggle that was etched into his features. For the first time, she saw Zion not as the man who had lied to her, but as the man who was torn apart by his own mistakes. "What is there left to say, Zion?" Amani's voice was cold, but there was a tremor in it, betraying the hurt that still lingered. "What can you say that will make any of this better? You've lied to me. You've betrayed me. And now, I find out that everything we've been through, everything we've shared, has been nothing but a lie." Zion winced at her words, but didn't back away. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, as if he were trying to read her, trying to understand the storm of emotions that outraged within her. "Amani, I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you. When I brought you here, when I promised you a future, I was trying to escape my past. I thought I could leave it all behind. But I was wrong. Naomi has always been a part of me, and I can't erase that." Amani's heart twisted at the raw honesty in his voice, but the bitterness in her chest refused to let her soften. "You were hiding, Zion," she shot back, her voice rising. "You weren't here with me because of love. You were hiding from your real fiancé, from your responsibilities, from the truth. And I was just a distraction, a way for you to forget about your mess. But it wasn't just about me, was it? It was about your empire, your career, your power." Zion flinched, the sting of her words cutting deeper than she could have known. He took another step forward, but this time his voice cracked with emotion. "I wasn't hiding from you, Amani. I was hiding from myself, from the mistakes I made, from the things I did to Naomi. I left her, and I thought that maybe, if I kept moving forward, I could outrun the guilt. But I couldn't. I can't." He paused, looking at her with a mixture of shame and desperation. "I know I've failed you. I've failed both of you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But please, I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Amani. I made terrible choices, and now I have to live with them. But I want to make it right. I want to be with you. Please, don't turn away from me now." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Amani's heart wavered. She saw the pain in his eyes, the rawness of his guilt. He was admitting everything, taking responsibility for the mess he had made, but the anger in her chest refused to die. How could she trust him again? Could she forgive him? Could she let herself love him after everything? Her emotions collided, a storm of fury and confusion. She wanted to walk away, to leave him behind. But the love she still felt for him, the hope that had once filled her heart, made it impossible to let go. The truth was, she was just as lost as he was. The decision before her was impossible. And as Zion stood before her, his heart laid bare, Amani's heart wavered in a battle between love, betrayal, and the painful truth. This wasn't just about what Zion had done. It was about what she could forgive, and what it would cost her to forgive him. The silence between them was thick, a heavy fog of unresolved pain and raw emotions that neither of them seemed able to navigate. Amani stood frozen, the tumult of feelings inside her swirling like a hurricane. Zion's words had cut through her defenses, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't expected to see. But it wasn't enough to undo the damage. How could it be? How could she, after everything, just turn around and forgive him, believing that love could magically fix all of their broken pieces? Her gaze shifted to the floor, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the whirlwind that had become her life. Naomi had played her part, manipulating the situation, using Amani's love and trust to further her own revenge. Zion had been caught in the web of his own guilt, running from his mistakes, from the very woman he had abandoned, and from the woman who had genuinely cared for him. And Amani. She had been caught between the two, torn between wanting to stand by Zion and the undeniable truth that Naomi's vendetta had to be stopped. The choices she made today could change everything. Could she really go through with it? Could she allow herself to become a part of this vicious cycle, a mere weapon in Naomi's war against Zion? Her heart ached at the thought. "I won't do it, Zion," Amani finally spoke, her voice calm but resolute, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Zion's eyes widened with confusion, as if he hadn't expected this. "I won't help Naomi," Amani continued, shaking her head slowly. "I won't be the one to tear you down, no matter what you did. I'm not a tool for revenge." She let out a long, shaky breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I won't become her, Zion. I won't become the person who uses love as a weapon. You've hurt me. You've lied to me. But I'm not going to be the one who takes part in destroying you. That's not who I am." Zion's mouth opened, but no words came out. He stood frozen, staring at her as if trying to process her words, to understand why she was choosing a path of mercy instead of revenge. Amani could see the struggle in his eyes, the desperation for her forgiveness. But she wasn't done. "You need to face what you've done, Zion. You need to face Naomi. Face the mistakes you've made, not just for me, but for yourself," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You've been running for so long, but you can't run forever. You can't keep hiding behind the walls you've built around yourself. You need to face the woman you hurt. You need to face the truth that you've been avoiding. Zion's expression shifted, the realization of her words sinking in. He had been running from Naomi, from Amani, from the truth. But now, for the first time, he understood that the only way forward was through the pain. Not around it. He had to confront the past, no matter how much it tore at him. "You're right," Zion whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I've been running for so long, from everything. From Naomi, from my own mistakes, from the man I used to be. But Amani, I'm willing to face it now. I have to face it. I have to make things right with her, with Naomi, with myself, and with you." The words were soft, but there was a fire in them that Amani hadn't seen before. For the first time, Zion seemed to understand that redemption wasn't about running away, but about owning up to the consequences of his actions. The path to healing, to fixing the brokenness between them, would be long and painful, but he was finally willing to walk it. Amani felt a shift in the air as Zion's confession settled over them. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering to try, to make the necessary changes, to do the work required to heal the wounds he had caused. And that, for Amani, was the first step toward something real. "I want to make things right, Amani," Zion repeated, his eyes earnest, vulnerable. "I don't expect you to forgive me today or tomorrow, but I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm willing to fight for this, for us. I'll face Naomi, I'll face the truth, and I'll face the consequences of my actions. I can't undo the past, but I can work towards a better future if you'll let me." Amani's heart softened at his words, the anger and the hurt she had been holding on to for so long beginning to ease. She had loved him, and despite everything, part of her still did. But love wasn't enough to erase the betrayal, and it wasn't enough to make up for the lies. Yet she could see in Zion's eyes that he was finally understanding the gravity of what he had done. He was taking responsibility, not just for his mistakes, but for the future they could have together, if they both chose to walk down that path. "I want to believe you," Amani whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped closer to him. "I want to believe that you can change, that we can move forward. But you have to face Naomi, Zion. You have to make things right with her before we can even think about moving forward." Zion nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I will. I promise. I will face her. I will do whatever it takes to make it right." The words hung in the air between them, a promise, a challenge, and a glimmer of hope. Amani knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more pain, more heartbreak, more healing. But in that moment, as Zion stood before her, vulnerable and willing to change, something inside Amani stirred. The possibility of love was still there, faint but undeniable. And with that hope, she took a deep breath, knowing that the real journey, the one of forgiveness, growth, and healing, was just beginning. They couldn't go back. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Together. The following day dawned with a sense of quiet anticipation, the air thick with the promise of change. Zion had made his decision. He wasn't going to hide anymore, not from Naomi, not from himself, and not from Amani. He had come to understand that redemption wasn't just about asking for forgiveness. It was about demonstrating through actions that he had learned from his mistakes. And so, he stood at the edge of the villa, looking out at the vast ocean, his heart pounding with both fear and resolve. He had one last thing to do: face Naomi, The thought alone was enough to make him doubt himself. But Zion knew this was the only way forward. If he truly wanted to fix what he had broken, he needed to own up to his past. Naomi had been more than a lover. She had been his partner, his equal in ambition and dreams, someone who had been crushed by his need for power. He had abandoned her for the pursuit of success, and now he had to come to terms with that. With a deep breath, Zion turned away from the view and made his way to the main building where Naomi was staying. As he entered the lobby, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He could see her already, standing tall and regal, her eyes sharp and calculating, just as they had been when they were together. She looked up as he approached, her gaze unreadable, but there was no anger in her eyes. It was a look of calm detachment, as though she had already made peace with everything that had happened between them. Zion stood before her, his heart pounding in his chest, his throat tight with emotion. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Rage, perhaps, or disdain. But what he saw in Naomi's eyes wasn't that. There was something more. "Naomi," Zion began, his voice steady but filled with remorse. "I've come here to apologize. I've come to make things right with you, if you'll allow me to. I was wrong. I hurt you in ways I can't undo, and I've spent so many years running from it. I was selfish, and I abandoned you for the very thing that should have never come before you. My career, my empire. I thought that if I had everything, I would be happy. But I was wrong." He paused, swallowing hard, his next words tumbling out with raw honesty. "I hurt you, and I've lived with that guilt every single day. I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to show you that I'm sorry. I want to help you build something bigger than both of us, if you'll let me." Naomi's gaze softened slightly, but there was no sign of forgiveness on her face, only quiet strength. She had changed since they had last met. Gone was the woman who had once been consumed by her love for Zion. She had grown into a formidable force, someone who didn't need anyone to validate her worth. She had found her own way, her own strength, and she wasn't about to let Zion take credit for it. "Zion," Naomi said, her voice cool but tinged with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "You think that an apology will fix everything? That you can just waltz in here and undo the damage you caused? You can't. But you're right about one thing. You were selfish. You let your ambition blind you to everything else, and you abandoned me when I needed you the most. But that's in the past." She paused, studying him carefully, as if weighing her words. "You can't change the past, Zion. But I'm not the same woman you left behind. I don't need your help, and I don't need your partnership. I've built my empire on my own, and I've learned that my worth doesn't come from anyone else. Not from you. Not from anyone." Zion listened, his chest tightening at her words. It was clear now that Naomi had moved on from their shared history. She was no longer the woman who had poured her heart into him, hoping for a future together. She had chosen her own path, and it was a path of power and independence. There was no room for him in her world, and he understood that. "I know I can't undo what I did, Naomi," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm not asking you to forget. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. What I'm offering is a chance, an opportunity for us to work together, not as partners in love, but as equals in business. I want to help you, empower you even more, without any hidden agendas. No strings attached, just an honest offer, for the woman you've become." Naomi regarded him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. But there was none. Zion had changed. There was sincerity in his words, and she could see it in the way he carried himself now. He was offering her something, not out of guilt, but out of respect. It was clear that he had finally come to terms with his past, and now he was offering a different future. "You think I need your help?" Naomi asked, a slight smile curving her lips. "I've already got everything I need, Zion. I've built my empire, and I've done it without you. But I appreciate the gesture. I appreciate that you're finally seeing me for who I am. Not the woman you abandoned, but the woman I've become. And for that, I forgive you. But I won't forget. I'm choosing my own path, Zion. It's a path of greatness, and it's one that I'll walk alone." Zion nodded slowly, accepting her words with quiet grace. He had come to offer redemption, but Naomi had already redeemed herself. She had risen from the ashes of their past, stronger than ever. And while their paths would never cross in the way they once had, Zion could see that she was at peace with her choices. He had done what he could, and now it was time to let her go. "I understand," Zion said, his voice steady, "and I respect that. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for the way I treated you. You were always more than just a part of my past. You were the woman who helped me become who I am today, even if I didn't realize it at the time." Naomi's eyes softened, but there was no bitterness there, only the quiet strength of a woman who had chosen her own fate. "Thank you, Zion," she said simply, before turning to walk away, her head held high. Zion watched her go, the weight of their history settling into his heart. She had forgiven him, not because she needed him, but because she had chosen to. And in that moment, Zion understood what true redemption was. Not about seeking forgiveness, but about giving someone the space to heal, to grow, and to choose their own destiny. It was a humbling experience, and one that would shape him in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. As Zion walked back to the villa, his heart felt lighter, not because he had been absolved of his sins, but because he had finally let go of the past. He had chosen to move forward, not as the man who had abandoned Naomi, but as the man who had learned from his mistakes and was now ready to embrace the future. And as he approached the villa, he knew that the road to redemption was long and difficult. But with each step, he was closer to finding peace. The days that followed Zion's reconciliation with Naomi were filled with a sense of finality, a quiet closure that Zion hadn't realized he needed until now. But the real test was yet to come. His life, the one he had carefully constructed around power, ambition, and control, had always been built on lies. He had hidden his true feelings, his real intentions, even from himself. But now, Zion knew he couldn't live that lie any longer. Not with Amani by his side, not with the love they shared, and certainly not after everything he had been through. He needed to be honest, not just with Naomi, but with everyone who had placed their trust in him. The time had come to make a choice, and this time he wasn't going to hide behind his empire. He wasn't going to run from the truth. Zion had a public life, one that was closely watched by the media, his business associates, and those who had invested in his success. His engagement to a powerful woman back home had been a public spectacle, an arrangement that had always been more about appearances than true love. He had worn that mask for far too long, pretending to be someone he wasn't. But now, As he stood in front of the crowd at the charity event back home, he knew it was time to tear that mask off once and for all. He was no longer the man he had been, and he would no longer live a lie. The lights dimmed, and the crowd hushed in anticipation as Zion stepped up to the podium. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no fear. Only the overwhelming sense that this was the moment that would change everything. He looked out over the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, but all of them expecting him to say what they wanted to hear, what they had always expected him to say. But Zion wasn't going to give them what they wanted. He wasn't going to live up to their expectations. He was going to live for himself, for the woman he loved, and for the future they were going to build together. "Ladies and gentlemen," Zion began, his voice steady but powerful, "I stand before you today, not as the man you think I am, but as the man I am finally becoming. For years, I've lived a life that wasn't true to who I am. I've made choices based on fear, based on the belief that power and success could fill the emptiness inside me. But I was wrong. I was living a lie." The crowd was silent, the words hanging in the air, uncertain of what was coming next. Zion took a deep breath, his gaze scanning the room before landing on the face of his ex-fiancée. "I've been engaged to a woman who deserves far more than I could ever give her. She deserves a man who is whole, who is true to himself, and who loves her for who she is. I am not that man, and I never have been." The confession was like a bombshell, and the room buzzed with shocked whispers. Zion's ex-fiancée sat frozen, her face pale, but Zion didn't waver. "I've hurt her, and I've hurt others along the way, but the one person I've hurt the most is the woman I truly love." "Amani," he said, his voice softening as he turned his gaze toward the woman standing in the front row. Amani's eyes shone with unshed tears, but there was no hesitation in her. She smiled at him, her heart full of love and understanding. Zion's heart swelled with emotion as he continued. "Amani has taught me what it means to love and be loved, what it means to be vulnerable and real. She has shown me that power isn't in control or wealth, but in honesty and respect. And it's with her that I want to build my future. I choose Amani. I choose love, and I choose truth." The room was silent for a beat, the weight of his words sinking in. Amani walked up to him, her hand reaching for his, and they stood together, united in the light. Zion's words had shattered the expectations of everyone in the room. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. He was choosing love, choosing honesty, and choosing the woman who had opened his heart in ways he hadn't known possible. It wasn't about wealth, status, or power. It was about the simple, powerful truth of their connection. "Together, Amani and I are going to build something that will stand the test of time," Zion continued, his voice unwavering now. "Not just an empire of business, but an empire of love, respect, and honesty. We will work together, build together, and face every challenge as partners, as equals. And we'll do it with the understanding that we are not defined by the world's expectations, but by our own values." The crowd erupted in applause, but Zion and Amani barely noticed. Their world had narrowed to just the two of them in that moment, the future stretching out before them, filled with endless possibilities. They had chosen each other, and that was enough. As they left the event, hand in hand, Zion felt a sense of liberation unlike anything he had ever known. He was no longer the man who had hidden behind his empire. He was no longer the man who had run from his feelings or his truth. He was free. He was truly free. Meanwhile, far away on the island, Naomi stood in her office, looking out over the horizon. She had watched the news, seen the headlines that followed Zion's public confession, and she couldn't help but smile. Not because of his choice, but because she had finally seen the man he was meant to be. The man who could love with honesty, who could be true to himself, who could let go of his past. Naomi knew the road to greatness didn't need to be shared with anyone. It didn't need to be built on anyone else's terms. It was hers to walk alone. And in that silence, in the stillness of her own heart, Naomi realized that true power wasn't about domination or control. It wasn't about revenge or winning. True power was forgiveness. It was independence. And it was peace. Zion and Amani were writing their own story now, one built on the foundation of love, respect, and honesty. Naomi had already written her own, and she was content in the knowledge that both paths, though separate, were destined for greatness. Zion and Amani had found their happily ever after, and Naomi had found hers as well. In the end, love had won. Love built on truth can heal even the deepest wounds. Power without forgiveness is empty. Real strength is choosing to love again, wiser and freer.